Hi everyone, this is Clara Baldwin on the first episode of Peace Over Pieces, a domestic abuse awareness podcast. So a little about myself is that I am 22, almost 23 years old, and I grew up in a college town called Columbia, Missouri. My mom is Thai. She's an immigrant who came to the U.S. when she was about 12 years old, and my dad is a full German, so it was a pretty diverse household growing up, you could say. I had a pretty average upbringing when I was younger. I played sports, I was raised in a suburb, I hung out with my siblings and friends. Everything seemed pretty normal until I was around the age of 8. I really started noticing things in my household that were normalized and shouldn't have been. My dad treated my mom like absolute shit, honestly, physically and emotionally. He developed bipolar disorder later in life, which was pretty heartbreaking considering I was a daddy's girl growing up. I feel like I had a special bond with him and we did everything together until at some point something snapped inside of him mentally and it was like he was a different person. I'm not exaggerating when I say that there wasn't a single day where him and my mom did not fight. Some days they fought less and some days the cops were called and my mom would run away after a while and then eventually come back. But without a doubt, not one day passed where they didn't argue. It was extremely draining as a child and teenager to watch and hear my parents constantly fight 24/7. You honestly become numb to it, even to the things that are too hard to describe and play back in your head. You just kind of play it off, and you also feel helpless that you can't intervene or help. Now, the point of this podcast is not to give myself a pity party in any way, because in all honesty, it's extremely hard for me to sit here and tell this story. I used to be extremely ashamed of it and ashamed of my dad. I hid everything all throughout high school. Actually, everyone who knew my parents believed that they were a great couple on the outside and that our family was doing fine. They were parents at every tennis match and soccer game or any extracurricular activity my siblings had, they were there. I feel like that even when I tried to tell my close friends about what was going on at home, I kind of played it off a bit. But as I've grown and I've gone to college, I met people who are more transparent and they're so relatable and honest to what I've gone through. I've made it a goal to develop this podcast and website for domestic abuse victims because although I'm not a victim of domestic abuse directly, it has affected my life forever seeing what my mom went through, so I can't imagine how helpless an actual victim would feel. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail of what I've experienced with my parents' domestic abuse case just yet. I'll save it for another podcast maybe, but they are both separated now. My mom's super happy. She has a wonderful boyfriend who I adore. And me and my dad's relationship isn't really established at the moment, but that's not the point. The point of this podcast is to help other victims. The goal is to interview with victims, and once the interview is done, I will post the podcast on Peace Over Pieces website. These victims can remain anonymous or choose to show their identity and help others who want to reach out to them. If you guys want to check it out, it's peace-over-pieces.org. There, people can make a 100% donation to the victim in each podcast or make a general donation to the Domestic Abuse Victim Fund. So with that, let's go into why domestic abuse awareness is so important and the misconceptions that come with it. What's the definition of domestic abuse? Domestic abuse is a violent or aggressive behavior within the home, typically involving the violent abuse of a spouse or partner. Women are much more likely to be victims of intimate partner violence, with 85% of domestic abuse victims being women and 15% being men. If you think about it, we are bombarded with stories in the news regarding domestic abuse cases every day, from athletes beating their significant others in public elevators or in their own homes to celebrities publicly abusing their girlfriends. Domestic violence is not a singular incident. It's an insidious problem deeply rooted in our culture, and here are some numbers to prove that. 3 women are murdered every day by a current or former male partner in the U.S. 38,280,000 women have experienced physical intimate partner violence in their lifetimes. 2007 women were murdered by men they knew in 2018, and of those 2007 women, 957 were killed by an intimate partner. 1 in 4 women will be victims of severe violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. So equality is equal. Women and men both have the capacity for violence. They have the capacity for brutality, control, and isolation of the victim, which is common to almost all abuse cases. If we don't hold our abusers accountable for the violence they're causing, numbers will only rise. Every year, statistics have been getting worse. As of 2019, the leading cause of death for women in the U.S. is domestic abuse. And more than often, people do not believe victims, or the victims do not have resources or money to get out of their situation. But once we recognize these cases, we can help diminish the problem. I mean, it was as late as the 1950s when people didn't believe in child abuse, and that has changed for the better. The same thing needs to be true for intimate partner violence. We need to understand its causes. We need to understand that if children are exposed to this level of violence among their parents or their caregivers, there is going to be a huge amount of gender hostility that arises. There's a saying that says, Behind every wife beater is an abusive mother or father. Why would a man grow up with such hatred for women? Most likely because his parents are abusive as well, and not many can escape the pattern of nature. So with that, I hope this introduction was informational for any of you listening. Let's all come together to help expose domestic violence in all forms and help heal and diminish the pattern of repetition. If you would like to listen to our first podcast, please check out the next podcast episode. Thank you for listening.